Welcome to Guided Home. I'm your host, Kristine Linares. I'm an energetic and quantum Reiki master healer, sound alchemist, and an end-of-life doula. However, my greatest role and the one that has taught me the most through lived experience is that of being a wife of 22 years and counting, and a mama to 4 incredible souls who are my greatest teachers and inspiration. Through this podcast, I hope to share things emotional, spiritual, and physical wellness through conversations with my friends and my mentors, and how my messy but magnificent journey thus far has ultimately brought me back home to the deepest truth within my soul. Because of this, I'm passionate about bringing you to the remembering of what it really means to come back home to your soul, how to embody the highest expression of who you are, and how that impacts every facet of your life. So sit back, enjoy, and welcome home. Lindsey Meehleis, welcome to Guided Home Podcast. Like I said before we started this, I have been dreaming of this moment for 5 years, and I knew back then that I wanted to have you on the podcast as the very, very first podcast. There's something so sacred and so special about you as a human being. 20 years ago, well, actually, you were at my first home birth, which was Justice. So that's almost 16 years ago. But back then, you were just starting this journey. Mm-hmm. And now you have amassed a huge following. And I wrote a little something as your introduction, but I'm going to actually have you introduce yourself as well. But if I were to put it in my words, Lindsey, you are a sacred birth shaman, storyteller, a witness and testimony of the miracles of birth, a woman who honors and trusts the sacred dance between a mother and her baby as they work together to bring heaven on earth. And that's exactly how I see you. That's exactly the stories that you tell. And I'm so incredibly honored to have you here. 1, because you are my midwife, and 2, because you are just this incredible spiritual angel that has been gifted on this earth to help other women to see that too. So
thank you.
Welcome.
I'm so grateful for those words. It's just a reflection of you. You're bringing heaven on earth, not with moms and babies, but in other ways. And also, I know that you see moms with babies in their bellies.
I do.
So it's the transition piece through that, but throughout all of life, which is traditionally what midwives have always been. Mm-hmm. So we're just reflections of each other, my friend, and I'm so honored to be here. It's like, oh, my sweet friend. Hi.
I know. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm glad that we get to talk. I mean, with microphones in our face, but
still, it's so important that we as humans start to record these conversations and make these conversations known. And there are things that are going to be pivotal in what the next transformation of this earth is. And so here we are.
Well, before we start, I do want to make a disclaimer to everybody listening or everybody watching, is that we do have a baby that's trying to come earthside.
And I'm going to look really quick.
So this is actually really exciting and perfect for this podcast, because this is real life. This is real you.
Real life and all about flow, right?
Yes.
Like there's nothing that I've learned over the last 20 years. It's that you have to be in the flow of life. And if you're not, then it causes a lot of problems. But once you step into the flow, then things come and you let them, and things go and you let them. And it's such an important piece of really coming back to the remembering of who we are. We don't have any part of our lives that is the same. Change is the most guaranteed part of our lives.
Yes.
And I don't actually like the word homeostasis, because that means that we're static. I've actually been starting to use the word homeodynamics, which is a word that one of my mentors uses. Her name's Wapio. She's a midwife back on the East Coast. And I'm like, homeodynamics, yes. That is what we are as humans. We are all dynamic.
Yes.
We're not static, and we should be moving and flowing throughout all of the currents of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's important. Then that's a huge distinction to be made, because yes, I have often used the word homeostasis, and I think that I'm going to steal that and use is it homeodynamics?
That's what we're calling
it. Yeah. It's the constant change and the constant flow. So before we actually go deep, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? Just give us a little.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'm a mom. I think that that's one of the the transitions that we have in our rite of passages. And as I stepped into becoming a mother, I also had the rite of passage immediately to become a midwife and to work with women. And it was because I had a bad birth experience. And so in that bad birth experience, I said, this is not the way it's supposed to be done. I just had something completely taken away from me that was my rite of passage. Didn't really know what that meant, but I felt it. I remembered it.
Right.
And I immediately started searching for something different and a way to help women not have that same experience. And I first came in with the archetype as a hero. Like I came to save people, but then I realized you can't save anybody from anything and they have to do the work. And so I then really moved into the healer and really just helping women remember and holding space for that remembrance. And so I journeyed throughout over the last 20 years in the hospital setting and birth center settings at home. And I love the name of your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's exactly where everybody feels most comfortable. Hopefully, there's always going to be circumstances where people maybe not feel safe at home. But to me, that's just where the heart is of everything.
Absolutely.
And so, that's what I've been doing over the last 17, 18 years is home births.
Okay.
I've experienced witnessing 2,000 plus births. Everyone is sacred. I don't get tired of it. I step into sacred space at every single birth. I feel in direct connection with God at every single birth. And it's just moved who I am as a person. It's moved who I am as a mom. It's moved the way that I am with my friends and family. I always will say that midwife is the traditional healer, the medicine woman that's in the community. They walk with families from womb to tomb. And that's the way that I practice in a creative way outside of, what we have as our licensures and everything like that.
Yes.
But even the World Health Organization recognizes that we're short 900,000 midwives-ish on this globe. And if we had the ability to provide those 900,000 midwives into communities, that we would see a drastic change across the board, not just in birth, but through adolescence, into puberty, through womanhood, into menopause. And that would shift and change the way that our communities are formed and grown.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, which brings me to my topic that I want to bring up is tell me about the Hammer of Witches. And it's called Malleus Maleficarum, correct? Do we have a baby coming?
Hold on. It's somebody else.
This is, of course, honestly, this is like live theater. And I'm no stranger to what live theater can be. It's like you have to adapt and flow.
Yes. So it's somebody else asking me if it's normal to have bloody show. Any contractions?
What a first podcast this is.
Oh my gosh. Okay, back to the Hammer of Witches. So I think it's 1484. I haven't looked at the actual number in a couple of months, but I think it was 1484 that the Catholic Church released a book, essentially, the Malleus Maleficarum. And it was when Catholicism was really starting to spread its wings and move into the world, missionaries and all of that. And the direct quote out of it is the greatest threat to the Catholic Church is midwives. And at that time, priests were seen as doctors, male priests. They completely eliminated the wise woman, medicine woman within the community. That's when the witch hunts. I mean, I think there was witch hunts prior to that without much documentation. I think that as we moved out of the matriarch way of living and into the patriarchal way of living, that there has always been that absolutely huge push within getting rid of this witchcrafty type medicine.
Getting rid of the woman.
And especially women as the center of our communities. And we're talking whole villages of women were killed during that time. If there was birthmarks, it was the mark of the devil. If there was women bleeding, they thought that was witchery. If a man got an erection, it was the woman's fault.
Yeah.
And so it seems crazy, but really, if you kind of translate it to modern times, there's still the same fuckery, if you will.
Yeah.
Got to put a little explicit note on that one. But that's still happening. You know, it's just has a kind of a new jacket on. And so it's interesting to see that even though there was this crucifixion, that we still rise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that one of my biggest missions here on this planet is for us to remember our ancestral wisdom that's within every single one of us. And if we just sit in the quiet space, it's not that hard to remember.
Right.
You got to be intentional about it. But, you know, your intuition guides you throughout many things if you let it in your life. And part of that intuition is the wisdom that's in our bones from our ancestors.
Yeah.
What research shows is that we have DNA within the bones of 7 generations back.
Yes.
And I also like to say in that same sentence, it's also seven generations forward. And so what we're doing right now impacts the next 7 generations within our, you know, lineage.
Yeah.
And what we're doing matters. And we get to, you know, kind of live up to this buzzword that's going around right now, is that, you know, what we're doing with healing all of this is actually healing all of the things that weren't healed within our grandparents or great grandparents, because there was so much oppression.
Yeah. And I say that all the time in my clients, or with my clients, is that when you decide to heal, when one person decides to heal in a family line, you heal 7 generations prior and 7 generations forward. And the very interesting thing is that in my healing practice, I find, or I become aware of, past traumas in a woman's body that is not theirs. And that blew me away when I started to kind of come online to that and really, really listen to my intuition, and within, you know, working with their energetics and learning that. And so that's 100% factual that what we do today impacts the trajectory moving forward. And so going back to the Hammer of Witches, I know that was probably not the first, but it was a very significant time, because that was when the church on a greater scale was being developed. And while that's not the first, can you kind of talk about when here in the Western world, when we kind of exited out of the indigenous practices, or even not just indigenous, but just the normal practices of women helping other women birth their babies at home? When was that?
So in 1900, 100% of babies were born at home. That started to change drastically up until about the 1950s. And by 1950, almost all babies were born in a hospital setting. And so what had happened is, I'm sure within Native American culture, and I haven't done too much research on Native American culture, and not because I'm not interested, but there just really isn't that much information out there with it. But I'm sure they had a wonderful way of, you know, developing Nizhoni, which is the beautiful way, and integrating the experience of birth into the way that they integrated everything with life, which is the honoring of the earth, and the honoring of the sun, and the honoring of the gods, and the honoring of the ancestors. But what midwifery as we know it in the United States was the slaves that came over, the granny midwives. And these granny midwives in the South were providing very good care. They would go into, you know, women's houses, and I'm talking like, yes, they were providing care to other slaves, but they would go into the plantation houses, and they would go into wealthy white you know, families and provide these services. And they had great outcomes. They were the traditional medicine women. They knew the herbs that were grown locally. They would bring all of those things with. They would bring a packet of newspaper. That's what they would use for Chuck's pads to absorb the blood. And these women had great experiences. And right around that 1900 time, if you look historically, that's when Rockefeller stepped in, and the Rockefellers knew that petroleum could be the basis of pharmaceutical medicine. And at that time, they owned everything. They still do, but media specifically. So when they controlled the newspapers, which was the only way of getting, mass circulation, any sort of publication, they would do smear campaigns with these granny midwives that why on earth would you want to have, give birth at home with these uneducated, poor Black women?
Yeah.
Slavery was still a thing then. So, there was that racial divide. And why don't you come to these new shiny hospitals that, we have these trained physicians, which in fact also Rockefeller completely dominated the educational system.
He paid for it.
And we look at World War I and World War II, and this was an opportunity while the men were off fighting. The women went to work here, and there was really nothing to do with childcare. So that's where these institutionalized educational systems were formed, and everything was dictated by the Rockefellers. And when we moved birth into the hospital, the training wasn't there. Right. I mean, the modern day obstetrical textbooks are very new in comparison to what we've done for
centuries.
Yes. I mean, come on, since the beginning of time.
Yes.
And we had these white male doctors. I mean, the admission rate for females into medical school in the late 70s was like 10 to 15% in the late 70s. Wow. Yeah. So it was all men. It was a male-driven practice, profession. And most women were anesthetized, given twilight sleep, completely knocked out, strapped to beds, because while they were knocked out, they actually were still, their bodies were still doing things, but they had no memory of it. There was an anesthetic effect of like an amnesia effect, if you will. And babies were drug out by forceps. Cord was cut, cord clamping. Yeah. Let's talk about that. The only reason that we developed a cord clamp is when we were dragging babies out with forceps. We would cut the cord because mom was passed out and couldn't hold her own baby. Yeah. And then what would happen is if they cut the cord while it was pulsating, that the blood would squirt all over the doctors and nurses. So we developed a piece of plastic that stopped and clamped that flow so babies could be taken off to the nursery. Most of the time, they didn't see their mom for 12 to 24 hours. There was no nursing going on unless moms were very adamant at that time. And that started the complete separation of any form of attachment as we knew it, as our biological brains are programmed into our culture now. I mean, we don't have good stats. We have horrible stats. Our suicide rates are astronomical. Yes. Our mental health rates are astronomical. Yes. At the basis of everything, if we look at it, where does that separation start? Where do we feel that we're separated? Yeah. Birth. Still today, you're lucky if you walk into a hospital and say to the doctor, we want delayed cord clamping, or as I call it, optimal cord closure. Okay. You're lucky if you get a minute, and it's like, that's full of so much blood flow and oxygen and
it's a vital organ for the baby.
They're born in a state of hypovolemic shock, meaning that they are at a decrease of blood volume than they've been used to. And then it's like, here, learn how to breathe air. So it's just one of those things that, like, where is this trauma starting? Right away.
And that comes through in healings. Yeah, it really does. More often than not, I will pick up on a birth trauma.
Hold on.
No, that's okay. I want to know. Like, I'm dying to know how are these babies?
Okay. Well, the one that was actually contracting hasn't wrote back, and the other one says she's not contracting.
See, okay. So let's go to real here, because I do want to circle back in terms of, like, where we became divorced from our remembering, right? The sacredness of birth. And you did a beautiful job of touching, two very important times in history where that had happened. But let's talk about real, because this really reminds me of the first time. So you and Sue Gill, you guys were my midwives. And the first time I had my first two children with another midwife and a doula. And I had them at Laguna Hills Hospital, which is no longer, I guess.
Laguna Beach one.
Laguna Beach.
Laguna Beach South Coast Hospital.
South Coast Hospital. Midwifery model of care, but still wasn't like the full blown. And at that time, which was then almost 21 years ago. Yeah. So I feel like I'm ancient, right? Like I see all of the new moms having babies, and I felt like, dang, I was doing that when it was almost considered, so I feel ancient. But anyways, I just knew that my first time I was like, I just kind of want to figure that out. But the reason why I'm saying this is the remembering. So when I knew that I wanted to be a mom, which actually is very early, I knew intrinsically that I was a mom. I wanted to be a mom. And I was on tour with Miss Saigon. I met a beautiful woman who had all 4 babies at home,
Wow.
all the things. And I was really intrigued. And I was like, ooh, that's juicy. I like that. I want to know more. And that was kind of like the entry point for me into like, oh, there's a whole nother world out there. And this was before, before George and I were married, before, I was even pregnant. I was still doing Miss Saigon. And then he and I got pregnant, and then we got pregnant, right? And I still wasn't sure. And I went to my very first OBGYN appointment, and I figured like, okay, I'm going to just do my due diligence, right? It's still unknown. I don't have support because nobody around me has done this. And so I went to my first appointment, and it was 7 minutes, and I was like, and it was with a woman, and I was like, I don't feel good about this.
You didn't feel seen.
I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel comfortable. And then it wasn't until that moment my grandmother came to me. And this is about the remembering, right? So my maternal grandmother, who I never met, she died long before I came. And this is before I was an energy healer and I knew that, about it. My maternal grandmother came to me and she showed me. She didn't tell me. She showed me what she did.
Where was she? Where did she live? Where was she born?
So my grandmother lived in the Philippines and had her babies in the early 1900s. My mom was, in the 40s, but my mom was the youngest of the girls. So, early 1930s.
Yep.
And in the Philippines, which was back then, it is still, parts of it is still very third world, but, in the barrio, which means, just nothing really around. There's no hospitals around. She had all 12 babies at home.
Yeah, of course. There was no other
option. I think my uncle, who is the youngest, I think he was born in a hospital, and I believe he was forceps.
Yeah.
And so she came to me talking about the remembering and that intrinsic DNA remembering, that lineage wisdom, and showed me what she did. And I thought, holy shit, if she could do that back then, there is no reason.
With no modern day technology.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no reason, absolutely no reason why I shouldn't believe that I could and was made for this. Yeah. And that's what started that journey.
Yeah.
And then you came with my 3rd and 4th baby. And this is really interesting because I don't know. Well, I'm pretty sure you remember the twins' birth of that year. And it was
on Labor Day.
It was on Labor Day.
Yeah.
So Justice, who's my 3rd, I woke up in the morning around 5 something in the morning and I started to feel things. I remembered what it felt like. And I texted Sue and I'm like, hey, Sue, just want to let you know. And she texted me back and she said, okay, I've got a team of midwives for you. We're at a twins birth. And if anything starts to really happen, you let me know and I will send my other team. And I'm like, okay. So got up, it was 6 a.m, walked down the street just to kind of like get my nerves, quell my nerves a little bit. And then probably about an hour or 2 later, nothing. Like I was like, was I even feeling anything?
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
So George and I did our errands that day, all day, right? That was started at 6 a.m. in the morning, did our errands all day, came home, took a shower, ate, and I went down for a nap around 4:35 maybe. And then a couple minutes later, Sue texts me. She's like, I'm on my way home. I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to get some dinner, and then I'm all yours. And 30 minutes later, contraction started up again.
Of course. That's what happens. Yeah. I mean, that happens quite often, actually. Like people ask me all the time, do you miss a lot of births? And I'm like, no. And they're like, how? You're so busy. Like, how do you schedule that? Like, how do you just take one due date a month or what? I'm like, gosh, if you people really knew what my schedule looked like. And, I could have 2 people that give birth that are 6 weeks apart on the same day. So there is no scheduling. It is an actually impossible task to schedule. Okay. So this is where I turn to God and I say, okay, if you want me to be part of this baby's sacred welcoming committee, you will allow all things to work out. And I get to be a vessel in that moment for that baby's sacred welcoming committee, which I do actually think is picked long before this baby even chooses its parents.
100%.
Because there's births that I have missed, which, albeit rare, where I have full faith and full surrender and say, I just wasn't part of that welcoming committee, and I'm fine with it. Now, of course, there's a level of sadness because we've journeyed through the pregnancy together, but I know truly in all of everything that I am, that if I'm supposed to be at a birth, I will be at that birth. And it's exactly like that. You know, it's like your body is like, okay, your baby, I'm going to start coming. But wait a second, there's somebody else that's coming first. They're on that day, two baby babies. Girls that came that day. And then we get to be like, okay, it's time.
Yeah.
And then they take their turns. I mean, midwives say it all the time. Babies take their turns.
Yeah, 100%.
And they do.
And who was meant to be at that sacred portal is meant to be at that sacred portal.
Yeah. Same thing goes for death.
Yes.
Same thing goes for death. I see it all the time. There's times where someone will wait for somebody to die, or someone will die when someone leaves the room. Right? Even if they're not conscious, even if they're not aware as what we, as we know it, they're there.
They're very conscious.
They're very conscious.
And it's interesting that you say that about death. Is I'm an end-of-life doula. And I remember at one point in my journey, I thought, I want to be a midwife. I want to be a doula. And you texted me, you're like, are you sure you want to be a midwife? And I wasn't sure. And I ended up being on the other end of the birth cycle, which is the exit from this realm, right? As an end-of-life doula. And I see that all the time. Yeah. I see the consciousness that might not be a human consciousness of the exit or the rebirth, but it's an energetic, divine consciousness that human being, has. And it's beautiful. It's this sacred dance between heaven and earth, right? And if we allow and if we witness and we hold space for that to happen as it's meant to happen, then we have gorgeous outcomes. We have hugely successful and blissful outcomes. And I guess that was, really the point of having you on this podcast, was to just share that, is to help educate and share the story of how we can absolutely be empowered in our sovereign remembering of what we were made to do, what we were designed to do. And so with that, because I know that I have a lot of women clients who are kind of entering into that space of becoming mothers, what would you say to somebody who's not yet pregnant and is doing the research? What is something that you could say?
Well, I think the most important thing is to actually get in tune with yourself first. There's so much information out there. We live in the age of information. Anything is available at the click of a Google search, good or bad, right?
Yes.
And a lot of times I see within the Western medical world that a lot of doctors, even midwives, will say, like, your Google search doesn't replace my medical degree. To that I say, fuck yes, it does. Right? Because you can't tell anybody that is empowering themselves doing research on what is right for them. Right? Western medicine is a pan-all. There is no individuality within that system unless somebody takes their time to make their patients individuals.
Right.
Okay. Now, with that being said, I always make sure that my clients know that I inherently trust that they know what is best for their body above and beyond anybody else. I am not an expert in them. They are. Okay. Now, I am an expert in birth. I am an expert in the prenatal process. But that doesn't mean that applies to that person. So if somebody comes to me asking me questions, the first thing I'm going to ask them is what they think. And then I'll share what I might think as well, which is also intuitively based. And then I'm going to ask them how it feels. Because I don't get the final say in what happens within their bodies. And if they're already pregnant, nor do I get the final say what happens to their baby. That is their baby that they have responsibility for at least the next 18 years of that baby's life, hopefully much longer, if we have healthy dynamics in place for parents.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if we tell a woman that's even considering this, go for a walk in nature. Start thinking about these things. How does it actually feel within your body to go into a space that is designed for sick people, right? Look at the statistics of what Western medicine brings to the maternity world. We have the worst infant and maternal death rate out of all industrialized nations.
Yeah, we do.
The worst. It is safer to go and give birth in Cuba. And I've been to Cuba. Cuba is an amazing place. It's safer to give birth there. Your infant has a better chance of surviving in Cuba than it does here in the United States. People don't know that. People don't know about the cascade of interventions. So you can get really technical and you can look at all these things, but you can also step into nature and say, where would I feel best?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and giving birth is psychedelic, right? So it's as intimate as making love.
Yes.
So do you want to be making love on a bed that has spotlights with a bunch of strangers in the room that you've ever met? Will you have an orgasm? Hell no. Right?
Right.
Or would you rather be in your home, in your little cave, in your little nook with some dim lighting and a space that you feel really comfortable with, where you're immune to the germs that are already in that space, with a team of people around you that support you, that love you, and that believe in you?
Yeah. 100%.
And there are some people that will look me straight in the eye and they feel more comfortable in a hospital.
Absolutely.
Please go give birth in a hospital. I'm not here to talk you into giving birth at home. It is not the best option for that person.
Yep.
But for people that can actually decipher that birth is not a medical emergency and are low risk, meaning that they don't have other presenting medical conditions that would make them higher risk, where they sure as heck belong in a hospital, then there's no reason for it not to be a consideration.
Right. And the percentage of that is what, though?
Of
high
women,
risk.
At the most 15%.
Right.
I don't know though. Nowadays, the state of our health of our
Actually, you're
nation
right.
is horrible. So I don't have a concrete number for it, but before, I mean, the World Health Organization would really say that no nation should have a C-section rate higher than 15%. But you know, post 2020 world, who knows exactly, but
Right.
you know, if you're conscious at all about your health and you don't have some, you know, heart disease or something, then really there's no reason to not have it be an option.
Right. I always say that to women who ask me. I say, you know, because I, like you said, I am not an expert in you. Only you know what's best, especially when we're talking about nervous system, right? And emotional health, emotional wellness.
Yes.
I never say one way is right or the other way is better. I say there's no wrong way to birth. It's just a matter of where you are at currently in your emotional status and your nervous system status. And I love that, like the prescription that if I had a prescription pad, you know, you would probably see get out in nature and stick your feet in the ground as like the top prescription that I give my clients after they leave a session with me.
It's the greatest medicine.
It is the greatest.
Anybody can do it.
Yeah. That in your breath.
In your breath.
In your breath.
Which
right?
you have to breathe if you're outside anyways. You have to be conscious of it because you're moving your body.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, we all do it involuntarily, but if we get outside and we actually stick our feet in the dirt, you can't help but come back to that vibration of earth and that mycelium connection that's underneath our feet, that's connected to every single thing on this planet.
100%.
You just do it naturally.
Get back into our nature state, right?
Yes.
That is exactly what it is. And that's part of the remembering, is getting back into our nature state, part of that remembering. And there's so much noise and there's so much discord.
Sorry.
And is baby coming? But I want to continue that there's so much discord in the world and the noise in the world around us that we forget so easily. So it's harder to remember. And that's the struggle. That's the challenge, I think, for modern day women, is to actually get into a space where we're actually quiet enough and trusting of ourselves enough to actually remember her, remember us.
I'm going to give you a really quick exercise, because a lot of people, like, we're so far removed from that that people are like, I don't even know what they're talking about right now. Like, what does that even mean? Like, how do I even remember? Like, remembering, what's that? What is my intuition? And so I say, simple. Go and stand outside in nature with your feet in the dirt. Say your name. I am Lindsey. How does that feel? Where do you feel that in your body? Where does that resonate? Where is the truth in that statement? Say somebody else's name. I am Jennifer. Ooh. that doesn't feel right.
Right.
Where does that not feel right in my body? And if you just notice the subtle differences of where it feels right within the positive truth statement and where it doesn't feel right within the non-true statement, you can start to apply that to all things. Hold your supplement bottle. Do I need this today? Do I feel constricted? Do I feel like, or do I feel like, yes, I need this right now? You can use this for everything. You know, do I go on this trip? Do I, you know, contact whatever it is, you can apply that to everything that you do in your life.
Absolutely.
Again, it's free. You don't need permission from anybody, and it's available all the time. All the time.
It literally truly is that feminine side of us that we all have. We all have both the balance of the masculine and feminine, and the femininity has been written out of history.
Yes. Herstory is what I call
herstory. Yes. And we've been indoctrinated and trained to not trust it, to think that it is the antithesis of what it means to be a human being, when actually it is the probably one of the most vital parts of the balance of being wholly human, is that feminine aspect of just being, listening, dropping into our body and trusting the messages of the body, and not outsourcing our own wisdom, right? And it's such a, you know, again, I guess one of the hugest reasons why this podcast is so that people can be guided home to that. Man, woman, anything in between is guided back home to here.
Yes.
Right? In order to be able to listen to that deep wisdom of themselves, of the lineage that came before them. And what wisdom is it that we want to leave and pass on in the coming lineages?
Yeah, which is so important.
It's so important.
Because it is a little overwhelming as humans right now because of the state of the world that we have. To even think of a future at this point, you know, like there's
100%.
a lot of stuff. And again, it's the age of information. So not only are we learning about it through like a telegram or a pigeon that sends us a message, but it's literally in our face 24/7 all the time with social media. So we're exposed to all of it, which is not how our nervous systems operate,
right?
You know?
Right.
And so we have to merge, if you will, a new paradigm of how we navigate being human in a very modern world.
Right.
And so, you know, I posted something yesterday and you commented on it, and it was a baby that was nursing. And when you were describing that feeling of just pausing and coming back, and it really made me think of the moment, because it's one of the most natural moments where we do have to pause. And so if you're a woman that's listening to this right now, I want you to actually imagine having a baby at your breast and hearing that suckle that baby has, and looking down at literally the most beautiful thing that you have ever encountered in your whole entire life, that's looking up back at you with nothing but pure divine love. And in that moment, there's alpha brain waves that we settle into. We're always in beta in our modern world. We're always thinking, but we really settle into this alpha brain wave, which is heart-centered. And when we're heart-centered, we get to operate at a much different space, and we get to be very heart-centered in that space. So it's an immediate reset. We have oxytocin flowing through our veins, our hormones, our pituitary gland is releasing all of these love hormones every single time that we get to nurse our baby. What a gift to know the essence of what being a mother is in that moment. What a gift, you know? And this isn't to shame anybody that wasn't able to breastfeed, but you know, that presence of what you just described, immediately that nursing image came to me. You know, that's by design.
It's by design.
That's by design.
It is by design. And again, I agree. It's not to shame those that weren't able to have the birth they wanted to, or those that didn't breastfeed. It's just in order to share that there is this whole world that's available to us, that was designed by us, for us.
Yes.
And that's there for you. And I know that, you know, this is something I wanted to start with, but it's, you know, where we're at now. But I know that you had a birth experience that was not the birth that you intended, perhaps, or even expected.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, that guided home moment for you, that circumstance, that experience that ultimately guided you back home to your truth, to yourself.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was my first birth. I was young. I was 21. I had, I knew that I wanted to do a little bit more natural. I took some classes and didn't really prepare myself for what I was up against within the hospital setting. I didn't hire a midwife. There wasn't any available at that time at the hospital I was at. And I moved through a complete medical interventive birth. I had every single possible thing that one could have done to them in that spectrum. I had cytotec and Pitocin, and my water was broken, and internal monitors, and amnio infusions, and like every single thing there is I had. And it was literally just a textbook cascade of interventions that ended up in a C-section. And I felt everything during that C-section. I didn't have anesthesia that was working properly, and nobody believed me. I kept saying, I feel that. And they're like, no, you have medication. And I'm like, you're touching my left, side of my stomach underneath my belly button. To which they then the room went quiet and they said, holy shit. And then I was put to sleep. So I woke up and went, oh my God, that's not how it's supposed to be. Kind of muddled through my thoughts of what that even was. And then, like I said, I jumped straight into midwifery, straight into caring for women. And I did have the exact opposite experience with my son. My son was born 14 years ago in my jacuzzi in my backyard underneath the stars. My first birth was just as sacred as that birth, because had that not happened, I would never have had the initiation to get my butt booted straight into midwifery. And midwifery is not a career.
Right.
Midwifery is not a profession that one chooses. You might think like, oh, it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I get to watch all these things. It is hard.
Yeah.
You don't
get
hard.
sleep.
You don't get sleep. You have to navigate a system that is completely against you.
Yeah.
You have to navigate literally being burned at the stake within a modern world. And then you have no predictability whatsoever within your family life. So what they say is that 50% of midwifery students will actually complete midwifery school. I think it's less. I think that it's maybe 30% that will complete. They say the average lifespan of a career of midwifery is 7 years. In my experience, I don't see that either. I see women stop much sooner than that. So it's not set up in our modern world to actually be sustainable. But here I am 20 years later, and it's one of those things that it's who I am. It's who I am. Right. Had I not had the experience with my daughter, I don't think I would have remembered who I was.
Right.
And so, it's equal. They were both so important to me. Wow. With my son's birth, I really learned my true power and what I was capable of. Yeah. But I did too with my daughter's birth.
Yeah. That's beautiful that you share that, though. There's a huge distinction that both are sacred. Both were very different. Yep. But both were sacred in their divine way, because one led to this bigger purpose that you had, right? And it just kind of made me think, it's, what is the solution? You said that we are short midwives in the world. There must be a movement to train women in every family system to be the family midwife. Yeah.
And it does not need to be through licensure boards.
I know that.
we need to take that piece out of it real fast, because there's so much regulation. 2014, we lost our ability to have breeches and twins at home. Now, I'm a gray area person, so I will find my space through all of those things. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that I have OBGYNs that I work with that will actually provide us with the ability to navigate that.
That's amazing.
But how do you tell a woman that's having twins that's had previous home births that just because there's two babies that you legally can't do it?
Right.
That's crazy. And so when we allow our children to witness us as healers, when we allow them to see that we believe in our body's own natural ability to heal, when we take out the way of thinking that we have to trust somebody else to heal us, then they remember too. It's already in them.
It's already in there.
It's already in there.
It's already in there. It's just a matter of awakening everybody, guiding
Yeah.
them back home.
It is. It's guiding him back home.
Is there anything else that you want to share about your journey that we've forgotten that's important and pivotal?
I think we covered so many beautiful things. I feel like we could have this conversation for 4 hours, but there is a baby that's coming.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Okay. So before we end, I would like to end every podcast as a sound healer, as the Sounds of the Soul healer. I want to ask you one question, and that is there a song or a sound that sings you home?
I'm going to be generic, but I have this tattooed on my body, and I tattooed it because it's the sound of creation in its own.
Yeah.
You know, I live in the sound of creation in most places, and it just always comes back to that sound. There's a moment right before a baby comes where I settle into my body and I kind of feel like squirmy, and then I go, oh, baby's coming. And I take a deep breath. And in that moment, that's the sound that I hear.
Oh my goodness.
And in my experience with helping people transition out of this world, it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same. It's that same feeling I get. And then I take a deep breath, and then I hear that sound of creation.
That's beautiful. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for coming. I was so jazzed that there were no babies leading up to you coming, but I'm even more jazzed that people watching and listening will get to know that this is the reality, of where we are. And how do people find you?
So my website is theremembering.com, and I'm on Instagram as well. I'm sure in your show notes you'll have a spelling for my last name, but it's just my name, Lindsey Meehleis, and that's the two easiest ways to find me.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I love you so much. This is
a dream come true, and it happened.
It happened. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Thanks so much. I love you.
Yay.